When we think about or even talk about the country of China, and that's right, the nation constitutes 1.4 billion people today. Too often we tend to categorize this nation from this political standpoint, and looking at this ongoing political competition between US and China. And it's hard to predict who is going to make the next step. But on the other hand, the whole world continues to focus on this Chinese economy. And again, it's one of the largest economies in the world, and look at the trade relationships and look at the Belt and Road Initiative. But today, that when we look at everything about China, that we tend to ignore some of the critical aspects. And what about the word called waste? How do we know that China today, and despite this economic ambition, and experts believe that Beijing and the capital city of China seem to take the wrong approach when we look at this infrastructure and also this internal growth for this economic purposes? How do we understand that? So that's why in this conversation, we are going to talk about all of it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, Professor Ning Leng. Professor Ning Leng is assistant professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, and she's the author of this amazing book, Politicizing Business: How Firms Are Made to Serve the Party State in China. Well, Professor, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, again, Professor, such an honor to have you on our program. As I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you because of this amazing article you wrote, which is entitled China's Edifice Complex: Why Beijing Can't Stop Wasteful Spending. Let's dive into a little bit deeper, Professor. In the article, I want to get started by reading something that you wrote and want to get your further elaboration. This is what you wrote, and I quote, "Currently, China's political system is stuck in a visibility trap that makes the country's development look far more spectacular than it really is," end quote. Professor, as I mentioned in the intro, when we think about China and when we look at what's happening in China, politics and surely top the agenda. But something that you pointed out distinctively that called visibility trap, and which hinders the development of China. What do you make of that? And also, why is this concerning at this moment? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so visibility trap is something I write about both in my articles and my book. And I think this is a hidden, in fact, it's not even that hidden. Chinese leadership has been talking about it all the time. In Chinese, they talk about, the phrase is 政绩工程, right? Xi Jinping's one of his biggest campaign right now is to stop 政绩工程. But I think what we seldom notice is the scale of 政绩工程, how it is everywhere, how it will be, unavoidable whenever Beijing wants something new and something big. And we probably didn't realize how much waste it's causing and also how much it's displacing genuine development projects. And so I came to understand all of this phenomenon and the scale of it during my fieldwork between 2015 to 2019 in China. And I thought this is something that we need to take seriously. And Xi Jinping is correct to take it seriously. But the problem is, this is a political issue that is extremely difficult for the Chinese Communist Party to fix.
Let's move on to our conversation again regarding the Chinese economy. Call me pessimistic, but at this moment, and that despite what the report has shown, people, including myself, are very concerned about the current Chinese economic system. And we know post the pandemic, there's no guarantee and there's no promise, even from this grander scale, look at the general picture, that this global economy is still slowly recovering. It sounds ironic, but for some of the countries, especially for China, younger generations are very concerned about this stagnation or this economic slowness. And this is something that you mentioned in the article. But also you pointed out that China has little money left to waste, but its political system continued to push officials to spend all in the wrong places. You mentioned the current Chinese President Xi Jinping. Pay attention to understand this. But meanwhile, again, he's only the leader for the country and he has his eyes on every aspect. Of course, the delegation and officials are doing different jobs, but you're saying the political current system continues to push officials to spend in the wrong places. Do you want to specify that? What does that mean to spend in the wrong places? And why is this still not solved despite what we are seeing the progress today? Your professor, your thoughts.
Sure. So let me describe what visibility trap is and what are these visibility projects, which are 政绩工程again in Chinese that I'm talking about. So basically, visibility projects is projects or government activities that spend on visible and noticeable features of a policy. And what the resources are then displaced from invisible, but most of the time more sustainable and necessary components of a policy. So let me give you an example. This summer, for example, lots of flooding going on across southern China, right? So many cities are suffering from it. And this partly is an issue from a lack of sufficient stormwater pipes underground and the lack of sewage pipes underground. But this doesn't mean we don't have enough wastewater treatment plants in China. It's just that in this whole policy of let's solve the flooding issue, let's solve, groundwater pollution issue. Beijing says we need a policy. We want a water policy. And this happened back in 2010. And Beijing says let's work on water. And what do the local government officials do? They take all of the resources they have, and a lot of times they ask companies to also, donate to this kind of causes. They put resources into the visible, above ground, verifiable projects, which are the wastewater plants. But they do not put resources into the invisible, underground projects such as pipes. But without these pipes, you're not going to have effective flooding control, however many plants you build. And so this is a policy, the water policy, become a victim to visibility projects. It becomes a visibility trap. Now, the reason this kind of thing happened is because in China, government controls all of the resources, right? And government officials at all levels, they are the executor of any policy. The problem is these government officials are incentivized in the wrong way in the Chinese political system. They're incentivized on two things at once: competence and loyalty. Now, if they're only, evaluating on competence, that is fine. But the issue is competence in China, because it's a top-down system, it's evaluated by quantifiable targets in this very formal cadre evaluation system. Beijing set a bunch of targets, right? GDP growth as a number, population growth as a number, water treatment rate as a number. And then the local government officials will flood in and try to meet all of these number targets. Now, the issue with the quantifiable, evaluation for competence, and this will be universally true, this is not just China. If you evaluate people's competence only by number, and then you tie this number, the evaluation, to their personal outcome, such as promotion, demotion, your salary level, your bonus, these are important personal outcomes. Then you're going to drive people into anxiety. The evaluated officials will try all they could to meet these numbers. So the result is, in this kind of system, a lot of people are going to game it or even fake numbers to make themselves look competent. And so the result is, in China, a lot of local government officials would look competent based on this system. No trouble at all for them to look good on the paper. Now, what that does is the truly competent officials in China then will feel that only doing well on paper is not enough. We got to do something extra. And that something extra is visibility projects, because they will be visible and noticed by Beijing. Nobody can fake them, right? So they want something big, something grand, something that is highly, change the city's, skyline or whatever you name it. Now, the issue is loyalty at this point kicks in. What are you going to do as that extra point for yourself in your political career? How do you show that I am more competent than others? Loyalty demand from Beijing to everybody dictates that these local government officials couldn't just go around and do whatever they want to be that extra credit. They have to be carefully treading the party line. If they do something that the party did not ask them to do, even though it might be a good policy, these people might still consider to be disloyal. So let me give you an example about what this means. 1996, I believe, around 1996, there was this county party secretary, and his name is Guo Baocheng in Shanxi. His county was not even that rich. The county back then was probably like the 100th richest county in the country. But Guo decided that I want to do something extra. What did he want to do? He said, I'm going to push for universal healthcare, free healthcare for my citizens. Beijing did not ask for that. Now, this plan is highly popular among the citizens, as we can imagine. But the party didn't ask him to do that. So now, once the party observes that, hey, somebody's innovating a healthcare plan and people love it, should we okay it or should we veto it? Eventually, Beijing decided to veto this healthcare reform. And I think the reason is there cannot be bottom up policy reforms that Beijing didn't call for, right? And this person got punished. He was first demoted and then eventually he was thrown into jail. So, this is what loyalty means. Loyalty means you have to do the things that party tells you to do. Anything else, good or bad for the public, you shouldn't touch them. And so, loyalty pushes all of Chinese local officials into very narrow lanes for that extra credit. Beijing says we want renewable energy. Everybody's going to work on renewable energy, solar panels, wind farms, no matter whether this electricity get out of the grid or not. Beijing now wants, robotics, AI technology. Everybody's going to work on humanoid. Humanoids are going to dance and going to sing, even though these humanoids, we have no idea whether they have any practical use or not. And so this is the visibility trap. It's a political system that set up the incentives for Chinese government officials, in my opinion, in the wrong way. It pushes government officials to put their limited resources onto visible components of a policy and ignore a lot of the times the invisible components of a policy. But we know for sustainable growth, economic growth and sustainable development in the matter of public welfare and environment, you need long-term, invisible, patient investment. And this is what the Chinese system does not encourage people to do. And so this is what I call, what I think is a huge, a hidden issue of China's economic model.
Well, Professor, thank you. Based on what you just shared with us, it's not only this visibility trap, and also it's a dangerous policy. It's a dangerous strategy because that would really put everyone walk on eggshells. Again, it's not just about getting things done. It's really about reading the lips and reading the minds from the higher up and start to say or start to follow blindly without clear guidance, without clear direction. Again, this is rather concerning for all of us. Now, let's keep our conversation going. Again, Professor, you talk about that this whole infrastructure shape up, and we talk about these ideas and etc. But when we look at, I want to go back to the word waste. When we go back to the waste, but we know that today, as you mentioned, that China, it's so laser focused on this technological advancement, artificial intelligence. This is a highly competitive field, not only with the West, but also almost against the whole world. So from your perspective, isn't that perplexing or contradiction that China would love to get ahead when we talk about technological revolution, but meanwhile, just because getting ahead, that doesn't mean the goalpost is very clear, or that doesn't mean that this result is going to reveal what the anticipation had. So how do you think that Beijing should understand this contradiction? You want to make progress, but the progress without clear goals. What do you say to that?
It will be very difficult for Beijing. It is true. What you said is absolutely correct. What does it mean to be the leader in innovation, right? So are we talking about, for example, the newest generation of technology? Are we talking about patents? Or are we talking about the best, applicable technology, efficiency, low cost, conquer the world market? It is very difficult for Beijing to understand these things. And therefore, they do suffer from a lot of fraud. if we look at the history of, this whole tech innovation investment, and we know the Chinese government and military are some of the largest venture capitalists in the country, right? If you look at their history, they got into fraud. Sometimes they really got cheated, right, by all of these other enterprises or labs. So it is hard for them. Um, but your question, what did you mean by contradiction here?
Well, when I say contradiction, Professor, which means the thoughts or the reality seems so conflicting with each other. So let's just say Beijing would like to get ahead for this artificial intelligence development. But meanwhile, again, based on the example you share with us, without seeing the goal or without understanding what the government would like to achieve, so basically the countries or the officials just follow the examples blindly. So that's why I ask, wasn't that contradicting or wasn't that conflicting with the idea that say you want to make progress but have no clear understanding of what the goals are, or I love to get ahead of the games to follow the rules or follow the policy, but still don't understand this content. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see. So this is how I think about it. I don't know if Beijing necessarily needs a clear goal in innovation. I mean, the goal, of course, is that Chinese companies should be ahead, right? But they might not necessarily need that goal if they will, in fact, allow, companies or local government officials to go figure out what is everybody's comparative advantage and how they should become an industrial leader. Beijing should become that supporter, right? It doesn't necessarily need to set a goal. The problem is this, and Beijing has not been setting goals on all of these innovation, like not clear ones, right? And that's fine. I think that's natural. The problem is with their political incentive system, they're not going to produce any, it would be hard for them to produce genuine bottom up innovation exactly because of visibility trap. Officials are going to focus on the wrong things in this innovation race. So, what should Beijing do here? Xi Jinping's solution is we're going to find examples of these government officials, investing in visibility projects, and we're going to punish them. That is not going to work because what that does is simply to push people to do even less. It does not change the source of the issue. To really change this issue and encourage bottom up, genuine innovation, Beijing needs to get rid of the loyalty demand from evaluating their government officials. Get rid of it so that people could, in fact, go out and find out what is the best for the locality, what is the comparative advantage of their companies. Well, but could they really get rid of the loyalty demand? Impossible. And so this is, as you in your own term, right? This is a contradiction. It's a conflict that they have to face. And it's an institutional problem. And I don't see an easy solution to it at all at this point. So innovation in terms of quality and speed in China will be discounted because of this reason.
Professor, I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about another section of your article. You wrote that this cat and mouse dynamic, it's reoccurring the feature of China's development in the modern era. But in the 1990s and the first decade of the 21st century, many visibility projects took the form of large construction efforts. Professor, what do you mean by this cat and mouse dynamic? I mean, because this is something that, again, quite vague, ambiguous to all of us. Because you're the expert, that you wrote a book based on what you share with us and also this article, but we really want to know that when we look at this political or this economic dynamic, what does that mean when you say this cat and mouse dynamic when we look at the entire picture? Your thoughts?
What I meant was Beijing is always a few steps behind local governments or their ministries in finding out where resources went to. They, as you said, right, they will have a new initiative nationally, environmental protection, renewable energy, you name it, and infrastructure for a long, long time, right, logistics. But then it would take Beijing a few years to realize a lot of these projects eventually on the ground is a visibility project. It's a waste. And so Beijing is like, okay, now we're going to go around and tell all of these government officials, stop doing these visibility projects. But by this time, the local official herd, has moved on to another field, to the next national policy priority, and create visibility projects there. Beijing is always a few steps behind. And the reason is because these are new initiatives. Beijing doesn't have enough information at the beginning to know what kind of projects are real, what kind of projects are waste, what kind of projects are visible only. They need time and they need information. So they just can't, catch these things early enough. Waste will have already happened before Beijing understands it well enough.
Professor, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, going back to your article called China's Edifice Complex, Why Beijing Cannot Stop Wasteful Spending. In the perfect world, humor me for a second. Xi Jinping understands this critical jeopardy. And Beijing is the capital city of China. Again, it's the center of the political and also this economic dialogues. If Beijing cannot stop this wasteful spending, what will be the worst scenario, Professor? I mean, I imagine that Xi Jinping cannot just be a bench player or cannot just blindly to walk away from this. I mean, he understands that this has turned into a crisis, and he understands clearly that this issue has to be solved one way or another. So hypothetically, Professor, if Beijing cannot stop the wasteful spending, what is waiting for Beijing at this moment? Your final thoughts.
I just think that, all it comes to eventually is that there are areas in China that is urgently, desperately needing resources. Beijing wants to be the consumer economy, right? So the local government officials needs to put money into people's hands one way or another. They are not supposed to just do shopping malls and, subsidize a few shops. That's not how it goes. So what happens is, and this has been a problem, to be honest, in China's economic growth, is that, again, money a lot of times goes to the wrong places. And desperate areas, in particular, I'm talking about investment into the public welfare, public safety net, unemployment insurance, education, health, all of these places. In fact, we need more money in them. But right now, money are put into visibility projects because of how the political institution is set up. And also, it's not that Beijing didn't set the right agenda. A lot of these agendas was correct. For example, environmental sustainability. And again, what this political institution is creating is a lot of projects that does not deliver. And so the development of China has always been, let's say, discounted a victim to what its political institution is. This is not part of the foreign affairs article that I wrote. Another big group of, that suffer from visibility traps is in fact China's private enterprises, the capitalists, which we know are a pillar of China's economic growth. Visibility projects, a lot of the times, are in fact funded with company money, not just government money, because sometimes governments simply don't have that money, right, to build another giant bridge or whatever you name it. They go to the companies and ask for money. Now, the issue is whenever a project is serving the purpose of visibility in the political system, they won't necessarily be, most of the time, they are not cost-benefit effective. They are not going to deliver profit for the company. So a lot of companies actually got dragged down in these visibility projects, and it just kills the private, the dynamic of private investment. So all in all, I think this is bad news for Chinese economy. And the anxiety here is, I don't think Beijing could effectively solve it unless there is real institutional change, which we know is very difficult. So unfortunately, I think this will be an ongoing feature of China's trajectory in the future.
And of course, Professor, along with what you said, not only this is going to be an ongoing concern for Beijing, but for the bigger picture, this can be an ongoing or a long-term headache for Beijing as well, especially we look at the complexity of the geopolitics. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to speak to Professor Ning Leng. Again, Professor Ning Leng is assistant professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, and she's the author of this amazing book, Politicizing Business: how firms are made to serve the party state in China. And of course, I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this article, China's Edifice Complex, Why Beijing Cannot Stop Wasteful Spending. Well, Professor, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay closer attention to what's happening to China today. So thank you so much for doing this.